go for it. Right. Well, thanks everyone for joining us. I am super excited about this one. It's one of the things on the list where I was like, I cannot wait to hear these two talk about testing in JavaScript. So it's a pleasure to welcome Lucas and Yoni. Maybe we can start with some quick introductions of yourselves, and then they're going to take us through a quiz style, like game show style rundown of what's exciting and what's cool in the future of JavaScript. So over to them two. During the talk, if you look, there's a Q&A bar at the side. If you have any pressing questions, pop them in there. If you see a question you like, upvote it. And at the end, there'll be time to go through those with Lucas and Yoni. So I'll hand you over to these two.
Yoni, would you like to start introducing yourself? I think that's a good way for us to start.
Thank you, Lucas. Sure. So my name is Yoni Goldberg. I'm a backend developer and consultant for 19 years. I work with, the cool part about it is that I see kind of at least 10, maybe 20 different teams and projects every year. And it's a great opportunity to see a lot of technologies and use cases. And the coolest part about it is that I really like to blog, to write in my blog. So it gives me a lot of ideas for blogging. I also maintain the Node.js best practice guide. So I enjoy very much also writing there. And among all these topics, I think that my greatest passion and love is testing. So here I am, really happy to be with you today. Lucas, tell us a bit about you.
Yeah, absolutely. By the way, I can vouch for Yoni's work on GitHub. That's been very useful for me. Basically, I'm Lucas. I usually speak a lot at conferences all around. I am currently writing a book about JavaScript testing, which is a great material if you're interested in the topic we're going to talk about today. I am also a core maintainer of both CityJS and Sign.js. So if you've used those two before, you've probably run my code somewhere. I've also done some other contributions to projects like Node School, to Jest. So yeah, that's pretty much it. By the way, I work in a company called Converge. And we're hiring. So if you're a JavaScript developer interested in new challenges, you can send me a DM after the. So shall we go with the rundown, and then we can have the audience for the.
Sounds good.
Cool. So the first one we got are the trends in the JavaScript test environment. What is changing? What's new? So yeah, why don't you start telling us, Yoni, what's your opinion on the future of JavaScript testing? How is it changing?
Cool. I think that the biggest changes, based on my experience, first, I see a lot of movements toward more kind of integration testing. At least it's a default testing for many teams. It's not said to say that unit tests are not powerful and not a great technique, but I see more and more teams leaning more on integration testing. And also, if you look at blogs, you can see here the screens that I'm sharing. There are more and more kind of modern pyramids that are not actually a pyramid, rather look more like a diamond or a honeycomb. So they put the emphasis on integration test. If you look at React, there is now the React testing library, which is all about they're doing component tests, doing the entire unit together. So I think this is a big movement. It's also much faster and easier to run this bigger test, the integration test. Other trend I observe, mostly on the backend, is testing in production. So if you can see here on my slide, there are many type of testing here that are more realistic and allow you to conduct tests that look like the production scenario. Whether it's canary testing or fuzz testing or property-based things that are more fast and more like are realistic. So these are the two biggest trends that I recommend looking now in testing. How about you, Lucas?
Yeah, no, I completely agree with what you said about testing production. I think that's a good side effect of people moving more towards continuous delivery and continuous deployment, in which they have shorter development cycles, they develop more iteratively, and they're always shipping. And I think that's a good trend, because basically, as people start to move faster, they start to think about techniques that allow them to move faster without losing quality. So among that, you see like lots of advancements into like logging, monitoring, all that kind of stuff. And also like there's lots of good stuff coming out in regards to feature flags, partial rollouts, and all that kind of stuff, which allows you to basically decouple the process of testing and deploying and allow you to move quicker without losing quality. So that's a big trend I see indeed. So I'm totally with you on that. Another thing I'm seeing a lot is the better use of types. I think when we start getting types, you know, when TypeScript was coming up, I saw lots of people that were like using types as you tend to use them like in, you know, in Java or like other languages like that. But now I see a lot more people thinking about constraining the state of their application with tests, with types, sorry, as to make impossible states impossible, so that they can run different analysis that tests, which are kind of like experiments, wouldn't catch. So basically that imposes more limitations on your code and just makes it overall safer. So I think those are the biggest things I'm seeing in the scene.
Yeah, that TypeScript thing absolutely makes also a lot of sense to me.
Yeah, it really complements the tests. I think, like, of course, it doesn't replace tests at all, but I think it's a good complement if you know how to use them to constrain your application state. Yeah. So the next one we got on the list is the favorite tools. So basically, we're going to talk about tools that we recommend for both beginners and advanced users. So I was wondering, Annie, what have you seen recently that you really liked in the scene?
Well, there is a great bloom of testing tools, really. I looked recently at GitHub, and there are, I think, maybe already 3 million, I think, projects that are only about testing goodies. I think so for beginners, if you're not yet on the Jest and Storybook stack, then they are great in the sense that they make testing really delightful and organic part of coding. For more advanced users, mostly on the backend, but not only, I would recommend looking at contract testing libraries, and there are multiple levels. One of the tooling allows you to check automatically within your test whether you or the API provider breaks the contract, the documentation, Swagger, Open API. So even if the test is correct, even if the test passed and states that the functionality is correct, maybe what you return does not conform to the contract, to the Swagger documentation. So without almost any effort, this tool will fail your test, telling you, hey, the HTTP interaction here does not conform to the contract. And there is a way to take it even a level up to formal contract testing using a framework that is called PACT. And what this does is it allows the consumers and API provider to exchange their understanding of the contract of their API, and each one of them can play this offline anytime. So you don't have to create that very expensive and fragile integration environment, and each party can check on his own side. It also has a lot of reliability feature, the PACT framework. So it's a very good library to look at if you are doing mostly microservices.
Mm-hmm. That's really interesting. I've seen a lot of tweets around the subject recently, so I guess you got a pretty good tip right there. So on my end, I think 2 tools that I recommend: one for beginners and one for more advanced users. Like the second one is not really a tool; it's more like a technique. So I think personally, the tool that I've adopted recently that has had the biggest benefits in terms of how much time I spend and how much value I get out of testing is definitely Cypress. And by the way, I think we had a talk about Cypress in the conference. I don't know if it was today or if it's still going to happen, but I highly recommend you to watch that. It's an amazing tool. It's so easy to write tests, and you can do like fully integrated end-to-end tests, test your UI exactly as your users would. The retriability that's built in, it's absolutely amazing. All the features for mocking, like everything's there, it ships with all you need. They support right now, I think, Chrome, Firefox, and Edge. So if you don't need to support IE, amazing tool, absolutely amazing. Highly recommend. Great value for time. And if you already do these kinds of tests, one of the things that I would recommend is visual regression testing. So I particularly, I like Percy. So Percy is a great tool, especially if you want to decouple your development process from the approval process that your product team has. So one of the things that's really nice is that you can, instead of just like approving your PRs without having product people or designers looking at it, you can have your PRs separately from the approval process that's visual. So your designers can go into Percy and they can check the old snapshot of your application against the new one, and they can approve or not approve. And then you can get those checks into GitHub before you merge things. So that's very, very useful if you want to decouple the testing process from the actual product and design process. So from a process point of view, that's a very, very interesting thing to do.
Sounds great. I hear a lot of recommendation about Cypress, and I think we just complement each other. I was more focused on the back end. You just provided two content tools, so nobody can complain.
Absolutely, absolutely. I totally agree. So on the best content, which is our next subject in the rundown, I guess one of the things that I can definitely vouch for are Yoni's GitHub repos. They have come very handy to me, for sure. So highly recommend you to have a look at that. Yoni, what's your GitHub username, by the way, if people want to go see your
Goldberg Yoni. I'll be glad to paste the link now in the chat.
Cool. Yeah, so that people can easily find you. Well, besides that, I think there's a few resources that I highly recommend. One of them is my favorite article ever on testing, which is called "Why Most Unit Testing is Waste." Sorry. So why most unit testing is waste. I believe it's by someone called Jim O'Coplian. So I highly recommend that. It's an amazing article that changed completely the way I see tests, and explains like what kinds of tests you should focus on and why some kinds of unit tests are waste, and like it teaches you how to think about those and how to go about that when you're building a code base. So highly recommend that. I think it's 12 pages long, not much. And besides that, there's another one which is really good for whoever's into TDD, which is TDD by example. So that's a classic that I highly recommend. I think because it removes many of the misconceptions that people have around TDD. People usually think TDD is only about testing, but it's more like about taking iterative steps. So I highly recommend that to learn TDD. And if you're interested in a very long book, because I am now at 550 pages on my book is called Testing JavaScript Applications, and it covers many subjects from front-end to back-end testing, acceptance testing, all that kind of stuff. And it's available on Manymoon's website. And I'll be joining some discussion tables to have a few giveaways after this panel. What have you got to recommend, Yoni?
First, I also read, by the way, this article about why most unit tests is a waste, and it's a must. It's a gold recommendation, absolutely. I just second you. I picked 3 things. Let me find them. Yeah. Okay. The first one is a great article. I'm more a backend guy, and it's a great article about how you test microservice. The entire philosophy, how testing microservices is different from our traditional knowledge. It's amazing. It took me a week to read it. It's long, but it's beautiful. I just pasted the link to the article in the chat. If you're a backend or a full stack, read it. Please read it. The second one is a book that a guy called Rui Osherov is writing now. He wrote a very famous testing book, which is called The Art of Unit Testing. Originally, it was published in Java and .NET, and now he's translating it to modern JavaScript. And it's also called The Art of Unit Test. What you see on the screen is only one of the concepts that he illustrates. Just as an example, a lot of time when we think about testing, we don't know exactly what to test and how many assertions to include. So he has a great model that every unit under test has 3 exit doors: a return type, a new state, and a third-party call. So anytime you think about a test, you have to test at least 1 door or maybe 3. And it highly focuses your test on testing this and only one of them in every test. Just one very nice concept he has in his book. But I also really like Lucas' book. And just a disclaimer, I didn't know Lucas until a few weeks ago. We just get to know each other because of this session. And I went through his book, and I really, really like the balanced approach there. Let me give you an example. I'll find it in a second. But the main idea is that most of the books are really religious. So if it's a TDD book, it's you have to do TDD, only TDD. This is how you do TDD. Other books are not covering TDD. His book is very holistic and balanced. So I just picked one quote from there. It's from the TDD chapter. And it said, anyone can learn how to bake a cake by reading a recipe, but only the best pastry chef know which steps and ingredients to change so that they can bake an authentic dessert. And I'm skipping a bit. Test-driven development is helpful in most cases, but it may not always be the ideal choice. And then it goes on and cover exactly where to do it, where not to do it. It's very balanced, very exhaustive. I recommend. I didn't read yet all of it, but I highly recommend based on what I already tried. So,
oh, that's great. Thank you. Thank you very much.
You deserve it, Lucas.
Glad you liked it.
My pleasure.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. And well, going forward, well, the next one is the biggest mistakes. So what do you think are the biggest mistakes that people usually do, Yoni, when they're writing tests?
I think the biggest mistakes are when people try too much. They commit to too much effort because you already have your main job, the features, the production code. You can't take upon yourself another huge code base. So you have to think about testing as something very lean and simple. So the biggest mistake are, or you try to write too much unit testing, or shall I say, not only many unit tests, but also complex unit tests, and you commit yourself to a lot of new code. I would recommend then try to find, testing is like a best guess game. The idea here is that you have to choose the as minimum test as possible that will catch most of the bug. So this is one of the biggest mistake. I see the second one is relying too much on end-to-end testing. So it's or too much unit test or too much end-to-end testing, in the sense that if you're doing microservices on the backend, the entire idea is that you're focused on a small code base, small component, and not the entire world. And then when you try to test, if you try to test the entire world, all the microservices, 50 microservices, then it goes against the entire idea of microservice, and it highly complicates your life. And it's back to the point. This is why I think that integration tests, small integration tests, are the golden path of modern testing. I'm curious about your advice, Lucas.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. One of the things that I do, and I think it really complements what you just said, is that like I particularly write a lot of unit tests, but as I move up, as those unit tests are not useful anymore, instead of updating them, I delete and I write higher level tests. So even though I start writing lots of unit tests, because I really like TDD, I personally feel very productive with it. I start with loads of unit tests as I write code. And then instead of updating them as I go forward, I delete them and I test the level above. So I have like less granular tests, and that really helps decreasing the maintenance cost. So that I guess is a really good tip, complementing what Yoni has just said. And well, the other thing that I think is a mistake that I often see people making is making too much mocking or too little mocking. So they either mock too many dependencies, and then their tests end up not really resembling what happens in production, or they do too little mocking and they end up testing loads of dependencies, lots of internal things, and they just make their tests very complicated. So I think those are the biggest mistakes I usually see.
Well, the first thing you said is really interesting, because there is a model that is called I think it's from the book, the Agile Testing, though I'm not sure. And there is a model that is called the erodic test pyramid. And it shows that in many projects, with time, many unit tests are being deleted because of what you said. They are needed when you code it, but then after time, they're just a maintenance burden. and then they see it as a side effect. They see it as a negative side effect of a project. What you propose, that it's a natural evolvement of a project, and you should absolutely stick to this and explicitly delete this unit test. So it's very interesting.
Because absolutely, because people don't think about this, but usually, like your test is as part of the code base as anything else. So you also pay to maintain it, right? So yeah. Well, going forward, almost done with these, and then we can go with the audience's questions. Is about, so you have here how to test the tests. I'm curious about that, Yoni.
Sure. How to will guard the guard. How do we trust our test? I think that, funny enough, I don't think there is any method that strategically can measure and make you trust your test yet. Finally, it's all about your self-judgment, that with time, you just trust your test. You just see that thanks to your test, there are not many bugs and you're being able to move fast. Someone just, Luciano just wrote in the chat, definitely not code coverage. I'm going to relate to this. So I think that the bottom line is there's no better way from you, self-judgment, my tests are good enough. At the same time, there are multiple techniques that can, on the tactic side, can save you from obvious mistakes. I'm referring to test linters, for example. There are many linters that can catch severe testing things, like test without assertion. Coverage, I can't trust coverage as a strategic measure. If I have 80% coverage, it doesn't tell me for sure that my tests are good. By the way, it's a good measure. It tells me something about my test. But on the other end, coverage sometimes can tell me when there are obvious mistakes. For example, I see many times developers doing skip over some test suites. Mistakenly, they just skip many parts of the test. And then coverage in a CI can tell you, hey, your coverage just dropped by 40%. You didn't mean this. So there are a lot of tactical measures. Nothing strategic yet. Mutation testing has the potential of being that strategic thing. Take a look at mutation testing. It's an amazing technique, planting bugs in your code and checking if your test reveal these bugs. But the tooling are not mature yet. It's slow, so I'm not sure where is it going yet. Lucas, what do you think?
Yeah, no, I think one of the things that you said there that was very interesting and that I totally agree is about static analysis. So what I think is that static analysis can help you prevent a lot of bugs. So the way I think about this, and the reason why I said that types are so useful in the beginning of the panel, is because when I usually think about types and tests, I think that types are like mathematics, right? There is a set of rules that your program absolutely cannot disrespect. If your program does not obey to these rules, it will not even compile. So if you can encode only valid states into your types, you can prevent a lot of errors that will never, ever happen, because those can be calculated before a program if it runs. And then tests are like experiments. Tests is like when you're like doing a scientific experiment, you take a lot of you do multiple experiments with different inputs under different circumstances, and you see whether your hypotheses are true. So your tests are exactly that. You're just like doing a lot of experiments and testing your hypothesis. And maybe your hypotheses are going to be correct for certain inputs, but not for others. And then that's why your test cannot catch all mistakes, because you cannot test all possible inputs. While with types, you can prevent that you will ever have any invalid state. So I think there's a lot of quality that you can obtain there. And I have a 1 hour talk on this at HolyJS from Moscow last year, if you're interested. So I go into this in more detail. And I definitely agree that code coverage is also not a very good measure for quality, because, well, as I've mentioned, you cannot test all possible inputs. So really, you're testing the lines you run, but not the observations you make, the assertions you make, and not whether you're testing the whole range of inputs. So for sure, I think that types that are well written, especially, are very useful. And if you're interested about this, I highly recommend a talk by Richard Feldman called "Making Impossible States Impossible," and that will definitely help you a lot.
Great. It can be great if you can paste the link in the chat. Also,
For sure, that's
Luciano,
a
you
very good
just
idea.
mentioned the Trust has some related techniques. If you can paste something like a reference to the technique name, to some tutorial, I'll appreciate that. I'm going to read it. So, and one small expert's tip from me, when you use coverage, most of the people use statement coverage because it makes sense. I want to measure line by line. It's not the best. I mean, it's an inferior technique. Branch coverage is better than statement coverage. And if you want to read why, I just pasted a link to a blog post that explains why branch coverage is your preferred coverage metric.
Absolutely. That's a very, very good point. And then for the final one before I open Q&A, your best advice for 2021. What is it, Yoni?
I would say think and plan your test to be lean, in the sense that you want test to be a friend, a good friend, not another burden. I saw, if you can see my shared screen, I found this guy in Stack Overflow saying, I get paid for code that works, not for test. So my philosophy is to test as little as possible. And this is interesting all the more because the author of this Stack Overflow text is Kenneth Beck, the kind of the father of TDD and unit tests. You wouldn't expect him to say this. So I absolutely agree. You have to think about, how do I test as little as possible and I still get the confidence? You can get 90% of the confidence with 20% of the effort. How? Write less tests, more integration tests. Whenever you need, write unit tests whenever you have a lot of logic, but this should be as a specific measure, not as your default. Test your deployment. If you have a canary deployment, then you know that if something is wrong, it's probably going to be discovered during deployment, and you don't have to write anything for that. Have a great testing on your production and rollback techniques. In this case, thanks to that, you know that even if you have bugs, then at least you discover them quick and roll back. Property-based testing allows you to test use the same unit test or integration test and run many permutations. So you catch more bugs, but don't have to write much more code. So there are a lot of choose the leaner techniques, the techniques that demands less involvement and effort from you, and make testing a friend.
I'm totally down with that. As Yoni has mentioned, and as is illustrated in Kent Beck's response, like companies, like there's only one thing that matters to the one thing that matters to companies, and that is changing the ratio of revenue that you make versus the cost that you have to make the revenue. And if you have a bad balance of tests, that just costs too much. So for sure, pay attention to that. And well, my tip is basically to really double down on types. So types recently for me, like after I watched Richard Feldman's talk, which is in the chat, by the way, has completely changed the way I write code and has made my code so much safer and has saved me so much time and saved me from so many bugs. So highly recommend you to do that, and also invest in observability, making sure that you can deploy quickly, deploy often. And yeah, I think those are my biggest advices.
Amazing. Yoni, Lucas, thank you so much. So I'm enjoying this. So I think we'll spend some time doing Q&A because I think there's some really interesting questions to go through. Michael's talk on MobX will be starting soon. So if anyone really wants to catch that, feel free. But we're going to stay here for maybe 10 minutes or so and try and get through some of these questions, because I think, I've learned a lot already, and I'd love to learn some more. So that was super interesting and covered, I think, every possible bit of testing that I could have asked about, which is amazing. But there were some really good questions in the chat, and the first one I think is a really interesting, mildly controversial topic, it seems, which is snapshot testing. So is snapshot testing a good technique, or where is it a good technique and where is it maybe not?
Okay. Well, would you like to start with this one? Would you like to start with this one, Yoni, or shall I?
Yeah, I can start chiming in about snapshot testing. So I would propose that snapshot testing is probably, I don't like to be too much opinionated, but in this case, I don't think they are even a valid technique. Why? Because when you test something, you want to test something, not everything. A test should have some focus. I want to test this functionality work, this feature. If I'm testing everything and the test failed, then what? Everything is not working, or is it just one? You need to have some focus in your test. And I'm not too religious, but some focus. Now, if your snapshot testing tests a certain 30 or 100 lines, then they test a lot of things. In the other end, if they test only 4 lines, then why use snapshot testing? If you test only that 4 lines are true, make them part of the test. What would you prefer? To have some assertion hidden in some other file, even if you have good tooling, or that 4 lines in front of you within the test? So the thing is that most people use snapshot testing to test a big bulk of assertions. And this usually, it's known not to be a very fragile technique. These are my thoughts, at least.
Yeah, no, I think definitely it's a good warning to avoid replacing assertions with snapshot testing. I think that just leads you down a path of making your test too tightly coupled. But I think there's a few very, very valid use cases. I quite like snapshot testing for very specific cases. So, definitely not just use snapshot testing everywhere. But a few of the use cases that I think are very interesting that snapshots are going to save you a lot of time. One of them is testing big chunks of text, which are just like maybe a TOC, a license agreement. Well, if you change that on your application, well, basically you don't have to copy and paste that to your test. That would just be a waste of time because you copy and paste test anyway. So that is very useful. And not only when you have these kinds of tests, but also when you have like console output. So Jest, for example, if you go and contribute to Jest right now, you see that they have end-to-end tests which check the output that Jest prints to the console against a snapshot, because you're basically testing a string against a bunch of strings. So you don't have to manually write things and do tabs and use spacing and coloring on the terminal and all of that. So snapshot testing is great for that case. And Jest does it to test Jest. So really good. And where that kind of testing is really good is when you're trying to test like CSS or images. So you can take image snapshots and compare them to other images. So that's the only way you can compare images. So in that case, snapshot testing is valid. And if you have like CSS classes, well, you also don't want to search on all these rules. So I recommend it on those cases.
Yeah, fair. I think that's a good way of looking at it. Like, it has a useful place, but if you're using it as your main method of testing, you're probably gonna come into problems. So I think it's interesting watching people react to failed snapshot tests. They, at least developers I've seen, don't go and interrogate the change. They're often like, oh, cool, it's just updated. I'll just update the snapshot. So it isn't, it's a very thin, I guess, a thin way to test. While Lucas, you mentioned Jest, and this is a question I'm curious about. So someone asked, Jest versus Mocha for backend development. What are your thoughts?
Right. So I personally, I use a lot of Mocha, especially like as someone try and sign, and that's pretty much what I did for years and years. But right now, I've been doing mostly Jest, to be honest. So I really like Jest. Just being able to parallelize tests makes them so much quicker. And also there's a few like issues with configuring Mocha for very specific use cases, and Jest just makes it really easy. So yeah, I've been using a lot of Jest at the moment, especially for its parallelization, snapshot testing for those cases I've mentioned, and overall how easy it is to configure Jest is just like very useful. But if you have too many tests and you need to run serially, perhaps Mocha would be a good alternative. It really depends on use case. There's limitations on both sides.
How about you, Yoni? Do you have thoughts?
I typically prefer and also recommend to my customer using Jest. I do mostly backend. I really like the approach. I really believe in the approach of let's make it. I think that Mocha philosophy was kind of I'm an engine. I'm a simple engine. I run your test. I give you input. It's okay. I really like what Jest is doing. The philosophy is testing is part of your development. It can run all the time. It should be delightful. It gives you very quick hints on what's wrong. I really like the way I code backend code with database integration test is every time I type a new line, my tests run all the time in the background. I don't even see the console. I don't look at the console. I don't even to look. I just code and code. If something is wrong, then Jess knows to pop up a message on my screen saying, hey, you just broke something. I can go to the interactive menu and have a type ahead experience. I just start typing the file name, and the entire experience feels like great developer experience. I like it. I believe in this approach. Just for me, please.
Fair enough. Another good question from Luciano was, where would you start with testing in production? What are the basic things you need to put in place for doing this safely? So I think, Lucas, you mentioned it earlier, and you also alluded to observability. So yeah, what's the first steps with that?
So I think definitely one of the things that you should do is start decoupling the development process from the approval and the design approval and product approval process. Because if you have to involve too many people on that, it's just going to slow you down. So a few techniques that I would highly recommend, is put in places the necessary alerts for you to know when things go wrong. I think that's very, very important, perhaps the most important thing for you to be able to do that. And then using tools like, for example, Percy, so that you can have other teams approving like the designs and like really decouple that from the development. So you can just press a button and deploy things, and you know that everything that's going to go to production has been seen and has been approved by other people. And another thing, which I call feature flags, I think Martin Fowler calls it feature toggles. That's very, very useful to gradually release things to different cohorts of your users. So if you're releasing something new, you don't necessarily need to put it on the hands of everyone. You can put it on the hands of like 5% of your users, see if you're going to get any alerts, any errors, or anything like that. And only then you gradually roll out to more and more users. So that way you can avoid shipping bugs that are too impactful.
I think that ties into this idea of observability, where if something is erroring or failing and you're not getting an alert about it, you're not seeing it, that's when I guess testing in production becomes terrifying.
Yeah.
Yoni, how about you? Have you got?
Yeah.
Well, first I think like most of the thing in testing, it means three different things to different people. Some refer to testing in production in the sense that testing the existing version on the production itself. Others refer to deployment testing, like canary and feature flagging that Lucas just mentioned. And the third one refer to kind of replicating some of the production conditions into our unit test. So the first thing, I think that you want a bit from all of them. And the first thing you need to do is first choose your mix of testing that you want to do. You absolutely want to have some safe and gradual deployment technique. For me, this is the holy grail. A great technique that I see many start using is running end-to-end test over production. It catches so many bugs and it doesn't require almost effort, because mostly if you have end-to-end test, just reuse them over your production and run them every minute or every 5 minutes. I would start with these proven techniques and then look at more kind of specialized technique. You have on the screen right now a list of candidates, but I would start with Canary and end-to-end test. It just works amazingly for most of the people.
Nice. And there's another question: is QA still needed?
Should I start with that one?
Tough one.
Sure.
I think it depends. Yes, it depends. Kind of not as a traditional QA. I don't think that we need the traditional QA. Absolutely not. That is located after development and blocking the deployment to production. And I think QA is needed for two major things. One is more kind of specialized type of testing. So a developer will write integration tests, contracts, but sometimes we need other type of tests, like fuzz testing, load testing, things that will just slow down developers. And for some modules, if you have that specialized guy that can do these things, then it can be beneficial. Second role I'd like to see QA doing. I'm not sure if most of QA guys are capable or not. I don't know, but it could be great if they will be a kind of guild master, center of excellence type of. We promote testing in the organization. We promote best practices of testing. We teach. We promote testing, but the one who's doing it are the developers. So this is the future I envision to QA.
Because I think it's interesting that like testing, the way a team or a company tests says a lot about their like team culture or like their approach to the code they write. And it's interesting that what you're talking about feels somewhat like a Scrum Master would do in Agile, where they promote Agile methodologies within a company. I think that's a really interesting idea about it. Yeah. Lucas, how about you?
Yeah, no, I totally agree. One of the things that I see is that, as teams like start to get more agile, they start to bundle more and more responsibilities into the developer's hand, and they start like automating more things. And that's what happened, for example, to DevOps. When you have a DevOps culture, you operate, you deploy, responsible for the whole thing, and the same thing I see happening with tests. So I definitely think QA is still useful, but mostly for exploratory testing and that kind of stuff, because those are things that machines can't do. So the real role that I see for QA these days is really do exploratory testing and very proactive testing. That is like automating their job so that they can be more creative and find out what are other ways that they can contribute to testing, and not really just like following through test cases. So yeah, that's how I see the QA role changing.
And then maybe one final one, because I think you alluded, Yoni, to you liked Lucas's approach to this. So TDD, like when is it applicable? When is it not? Should it always be used, or is it a tool to be used when it's needed?
Shall I start?
Go for it, yeah.
Okay. I think that I was opinionated. I usually not, but I was opinionated enough during this session, and I'm going to answer to this with a question. Here's an interesting story that I've heard, that there was some kind of a research where two teams were competing. They received the same requirements. One of them had to implement it with TDD, and the second one was a freestyle kind of testing or not. And the results were they were given, I think, 20 days to finalize and ship to production the model, and the TDD team finalized it almost like they accomplished it almost on the last day, let's say, and after the 19 days, and the results were quite good. They ran a survey through the team, and they asked the developers, how confident are you in the code? And the TDD team were very confident in the code. There were very few bugs, but they were almost on production day. The second team finished after 13 days, like a week before production, and there were more bugs. The code was not as perfect. Which scenario would you prefer? Being a week advanced from production with a mediocre code, but you have 7 days for refinements and optimization and hardening, or being on the last minute, but knowing that your code, your domain is perfect? Up to you. I have my thoughts, but
what would you pick then, Yoni? What would be your approach?
Mine? Absolutely the second one, because if you look at delivering software from risk management perspective, so many things can wrong. Databases, integration, production, Kubernetes, a lot of things, unpredicted input, so many things. And my logic, the domain of my code is just one risk out of so many. If I focus only on this, on the correctness and the perfections of my design, I don't think that this is it's a good bet. It's a good portfolio of risk management. I would prefer a good enough code, but testing integration and production and load testing and memory leaks before I go live. That's my view. I'm curious. I'm really curious to hear Lucas, but also yours. Which option?
Yeah, no, Absolutely, I am with you. I would also choose the second one because a very good quote that I like is that if it doesn't work, it doesn't matter how fast it doesn't work, right? So yeah, I am totally with you on that. Yeah, I think from a risk management perspective, I would definitely go with the second one. And I think that personally, after you practice TDD for a while, you can kind of like get a feel for how you could do it in such a way as to not delay your deliverable so much. Because of course it's going to add you like some time because you're essentially writing more lines of code. So for sure you're going to have to spend a little bit more time. But if you know which lines of code to write, and if you can get quick feedback, you can save yourself all the time that you fix, like spending like stupid mistakes of like, oh, did I press the right thing here? Did I miss an argument there? And then you're just like always opening the UI and clicking things. It just takes you a lot of time to figure out what's wrong. So I think that if you start testing at the right level of integration, and if you increase the size of your steps, the more confident you are. If you really get the feel for how to do TDD in such a way as to adapt it to the kind of code you're writing and how confident you feel, I think that you can make it really, really way quicker than it would be as if you were just like starting, just being very religious about the way you do TDD. That's what I would say.
It makes total sense. Yeah. Cool. I think let's call it there. For everyone still on with us, I think Lucas will be around on the tables. Yoni might be as well. So if you've got more questions, find them and ask away. Thank you again, both of you. That was absolutely amazing. I learned way more than I expected, which is always nice. Thanks everyone for coming. If you go back to the like YouTube link and the other Remo room, I think Michael's probably still talking about MobX. And enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. It was a pleasure. Bye bye. See you later.
Yeah, it was a pleasure for me too. I'll be around in tables with some books for everyone. I mean, not for everyone, but quite a few.
Thanks both.